Before moving on to the introduction to machine learning, let's first discuss the four major pillars of data science. So, the four major pillars of data science are data, number one, technology, number two, business, number three, and science, number four. So, these are basically four aspects of data science. So I am discussing these four pillars because I want to enhance the importance of machine learning within data science. So so far we have already have this detailed discussion about the data. We now know that how many types of data we have and what formats of data can be involved in data science. So now we have fully understood different types of data, their categories, and we also know that what kind of data can relate to which domain and what kind of data can relate to another domain. So so far we have clear understanding of different aspects of the data, right? Now the next thing is that we need to process this data in order to generate some useful insights, right? So the target in data science is basically to generate analytics from different source of data, and for in order to generate analytics we need some technology, we need some scientific algorithms which we can apply on the data, right? So in order to apply that science or scientific knowledge we need a basic platform, and this basic platform is basically provided by the technological advancements. So with the passage of time now we are much more advanced in technology and we have much mature tools and frameworks available, right? And we use these tools and frameworks in order to execute the scientific knowledge. So scientific knowledge is basically the machine learning algorithms, right? So this technology or the tools and frameworks are basically referring to the infrastructure, the distributed infrastructure which we use nowadays, for example, in the form of clusters, or it is, for example, in the form of cloud computing domain, right? And we have different tools such as we have Hadoop with us, we have Spark with us, and we have also many other frameworks which enable us to execute those algorithms on these technological advancements based on distributed computing or cloud computing. So this is basically the step which we will discuss after discussing our algorithmic side. And you know that here is in science we are basically discussing about the algorithms, and those algorithms are coming from machine learning domain which are basically based on our statistical and probabilistical models, and the advanced form of the basic machine learning algorithms are in the form of deep learning. So these algorithms, when we execute them on different data sets based on these technological advancements, then they result in different business applications which helps us to make more informed decisions in the businesses, right? So these can be in the form of different applications. We can have a lot of business intelligent applications which help us to boost not only business but also help us to make more advanced informed decisions. The exploratory data analysis is the term which we use in order to have more understanding or better understanding of the data. So there are five essential steps which are involved to perform data science, and those five steps are as follows. So then in the number one step we basically ask an interesting question. So this interesting question is basically our problem domain, or the problem which we intend to solve, right? So this is basically an unsolved question or unsolved area which we want to solve, or it can be a targeted problem which we want to resolve through data analysis. So after defining our problem or after defining our question, the Next thing is to obtain data about that question, right? It is basically the data gathering process or data acquisition process in which we are trying to obtain different sorts of data related to our problem. So it is important that this step number 2 should belong or should relate to step number 1, right? The data which we are gathering or acquiring should directly relate it to our problem, so that we can after processing that data we could be able to solve this question. Once we obtain this data and we have different data collected from different sources, and after integration of this data we basically try to explore the data, right? So this exploration basically also refers to extracting useful features from this data. So again, it is highly dependent on the application which we are working, or the domain which we are trying to solve. Our feature extraction approach can change. So in exploratory data analysis, exploring the data itself is a very fundamental task, and it also requires you to have some background knowledge of the domain. So domain knowledge or the business knowledge plays a very important and vital step in exploring the data. And once we have the data explored, then we try to model an algorithm for the data, right? So this is the fourth step, which is modeling the data. So we are basically trying to model an algorithm through which we could process or model the data. Once we have this modeling completed, then we can move on to the next step, which is communicating and visualizing the results, right? So in this phase number 5, we can have different visualizations. We can have different platforms or dashboards in which we can have different charts and graph which helps us to visualize the results. So in exploring the data, we can also have some further questions which are very interesting to answer. For example, we can ask that is the data organized or not. So indirectly we are talking here about the structured or unstructured data. Then we can ask that what does each row represent, because if we are working on the relational data set, if we have data in the form of tabular format, then we can know that what each row is representing in our table. And similarly, we should also know that what each column is representing in our table, right? So once we have this information, then we can look further in the data cleaning process, which can say that is there any missing data points, right? So if we have some missing values in the data, then it is very important that we should figure out a way in which we could solve the missing data points, right? Because if the data which we are providing to the algorithm contains missing values, then it can result in the poor performance of the algorithm. And the next step is which we want to see is that do we need to perform any transformations on the columns, right? Because sometimes we need to do these transformations, but sometimes the data is in a good format that we don't have to apply transformations on it. Also, there are 4 scales, and there are 4 data measurement scales. One is nominal, second is ordinal, third is interval, and the fourth is ratio. So nominal scales are used for labeling variables without any quantitative value. Nominal scales could simply be called labels. Ordinal, the order of the values is what's important and significant, but the difference between each one is not really known. In interval scales are numeric scales in which we know both the order and the exact differences between the values. The classic example of an interval scale is Celsius temperature, because the difference between each value is the same. Similarly, the fourth one is the ratio. Everything above about interval data applies to ratio scales, plus ratio scales have a clear definition of 0. So good examples of ratio variables include height, weight, and duration. So these were the basic understanding about about data exploration, which were necessary to discuss before we move on to machine learning. So let's move on to the introduction to machine learning algorithms.